I never thought my neighbor would cost me $50,000 before I even met her face to face. But that's exactly what happened when I moved into Silverbrook Estates in Charlotte, North Carolina. The whole mess started on a Tuesday morning in late March when I was standing in my driveway, watching the contractor I had hired drive away without even getting out of his truck. I had been waiting for Tom Martinez from Blue Sky Renovations for 3 weeks to get started on my kitchen remodel. The guy pulled up, sat in his truck for maybe 2 minutes while talking on his phone, then just drove off. I called him immediately, confused and more than a little annoyed. "Tom, what's going on? You just left without even coming inside," I said, trying to keep my voice level. There was an uncomfortable pause on the other end. "Listen, Quentin, I'm really sorry, but I can't take on your project. Something came up. We had a contract. I already paid you the deposit. I'll mail you a check for the deposit. I just can't do the work. I'm sorry." He hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there staring at my phone, completely baffled. Tom had been excited about this project. It was a full kitchen renovation, good money, and he had shown me detailed plans just a week ago. None of this made sense. 2 days later, the same thing happened with my landscaper. David Chen from Greenscape Solutions was supposed to start work on my backyard, putting in a new patio and garden beds. He showed up right on time, but instead of unloading his equipment, he walked up to me with an apologetic expression that I was starting to recognize. "Mr. Quill, I need to talk to you about the project," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Let me guess. Something came up and you can't do the work." He looked surprised that I knew. "Yeah, actually, I'm really sorry. I'll return your deposit right away." "David, level with me. What's really going on here? This is the second contractor who's backed out on me this week." He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around like he was worried someone might overhear. "Look, I probably shouldn't say anything, but you seem like a good guy. You might want to check with your HOA, that's all I can tell you." He walked back to his truck and left, my HOA. I had barely thought about the Silverbrook Estates Homeowners Association since I moved in 2 months ago. I had signed all the paperwork, paid my dues, and received a thick packet of rules and regulations that I had admittedly only skimmed through. The whole community was nice enough, with well-maintained homes and manicured lawns. I hadn't had any issues with them, until now, apparently. I decided to go straight to the source. The HOA office was located in a small building near the community clubhouse, about a 5-minute walk from my house. When I walked in, a young woman at the front desk greeted me with a professional smile. "Hi, I'm Quentin Quill from 1847 Maple Ridge Drive. I'd like to speak with someone about my account and any issues that might be on file." "Sure, let me check." She typed on her computer for a moment. "It looks like Mrs. Deborah Hartwell is the board member assigned to your street. She's actually in her office right now. Let me see if she's available." A few minutes later, I was sitting across from Deborah Hartwell, and I understood immediately what I was dealing with. She was probably in her mid-50s, with blonde hair styled in that specific way that required weekly salon visits, and she looked at me with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Everything about her screamed entitled suburban authority figure. "Mr. Quill, how can I help you today?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I've had 2 contractors back out on me this week, and one of them suggested it might have something to do with the HOA. I wanted to check if there's some kind of issue I'm not aware of." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Well, I'm not sure what contractors you're referring to, but all exterior work does need to be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Did you submit the proper forms?" "I submitted everything 6 weeks ago. I got approval for both projects in writing." Let me check our files." She made a show of looking through some papers on her desk, though I noticed she didn't actually seem to be searching for anything specific. Yes, I see here that you were approved for a kitchen renovation and landscaping work. Everything seems to be in order on our end. Perhaps your contractors simply found other projects. That happens sometimes. 2 contractors in 1 week, and one of them specifically told me to check with the HOA. Deborah's smile tightened. Mr. Quill, I'm not sure what you're insinuating, but the Homeowners Association exists to maintain property values and ensure our community standards. We certainly wouldn't interfere with properly approved projects. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere with her, so I thanked her for her time and left. But David's words kept echoing in my head. He had specifically mentioned the HOA. There was something going on, and I was determined to figure out what. Over the next week, I contacted 3 more contractors for various projects around my house. A roofer to fix some damaged shingles, an electrician to upgrade my panel, and a plumber to replace some old pipes. Every single one of them either canceled on me at the last minute, or in one case, never showed up at all despite confirming the appointment that morning. I was furious and completely confused. My house was a mess. I had already torn out my old kitchen cabinets in preparation for the remodel, so I was living with a half-demolished kitchen. The damaged shingles were starting to cause leaks. Nothing was getting done, and I was hemorrhaging money on deposits and cancellation fees. That's when I decided to do some investigating on my own. I called up Tom Martinez again, the first contractor who had backed out. Tom, I need to know what really happened. I'm not angry at you, but I need to understand why you canceled. 5 different contractors have now refused to work on my house. Something is seriously wrong. There was a long silence. Finally, he sighed. Quentin, I like you, and I feel terrible about this, but I can't afford to get blacklisted in this area. Your HOA president called me personally and told me that if I worked on your property, she would make sure that no one in Silverbrook Estates or any of the connected communities would ever hire me again. That's hundreds of potential clients. I can't risk that for one kitchen remodel. My blood ran cold. Deborah Hartwell called you. Yeah. She said you were a problem homeowner and that the HOA was building a case to force you out. She said anyone who worked with you would be considered in violation of community standards and would be blacklisted from all HOA-approved contractor lists. That's insane. I haven't done anything wrong. I've followed every rule, submitted every form. I believe you, man. But she was very convincing, and she has a lot of power around here. She's connected to HOAs in like 6 different neighborhoods. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. After I hung up, I sat in my half-destroyed kitchen, trying to process what I had just learned. Deborah Hartwell was actively sabotaging my ability to maintain and improve my own property. But why? I had never even met her before this week. What could I have possibly done to make her target me like this? I spent the next few days digging through all my HOA paperwork, trying to find some clue about what I might have violated. Everything was in order. My dues were paid. My lawn was maintained. I hadn't painted my house a weird color or put up any offensive decorations. There was literally nothing. Then I talked to my next-door neighbor, an older man named Richard who had lived in Silverbrook Estates for 15 years. Deborah Hartwell, he said, shaking his head when I asked him about her. Yeah, she's a piece of work. She's been on some kind of power trip ever since she became HOA president 3 years ago. She's forced out at least 4 families that I know of. Forced them out. How? Different ways. With one family, she kept fining them for bogus violations until they couldn't afford to stay. With another, She blocked every single improvement they tried to make until their house became so run down they had to sell. She's smart about it, always finding ways to make it look legitimate. But why? What does she get out of it? Richard lowered his voice, even though we were standing in my driveway and there was no one around. I shouldn't be telling you this, but I think you deserve to know. Deborah's son is a real estate agent. Every time she forces someone out, they sell their house for less than it's worth because they're desperate. Then Deborah's son lists the property, and his business partner buys it, fixes it up, and flips it for a huge profit. They split the money 3 ways. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. That's fraud. That's conspiracy. That's a dozen different crimes. Probably. But she's careful, and no one has ever been able to prove it. People just want to get out and move on with their lives. No one wants to spend years fighting an HOA in court. Well, I'm not going anywhere, I said. I just bought this house. I put my entire life savings into it. If she thinks she can push me out, she's wrong. Richard gave me a sympathetic look. I admire your determination, but be careful. Deborah doesn't like losing. I knew I needed legal help, so I started researching real estate attorneys in Charlotte. I found a lawyer named Patricia Foster who specialized in HOA disputes and had excellent reviews. Her consultation fee was $300, but at this point, I didn't care about the cost. I needed answers. Patricia was a sharp woman in her early 40s with an office in downtown Charlotte. I laid out everything that had happened, showed her all my documentation, and told her what Tom Martinez had revealed about Deborah's phone call. She listened carefully, taking notes, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair with a serious expression. Quentin, what you're describing is called tortious interference. It's a civil claim that occurs when someone intentionally damages your business relationships or contracts. In this case, Deborah Hartwell is allegedly interfering with your contracts with various contractors, causing you financial harm. Can we sue her for that? We can, and based on what you've told me, I think we have a strong case. But here's what we need to do first. We need evidence. Right now, we have one contractor's word about a phone call. We need more. We need documentation, recordings if possible, and testimony from multiple sources. How do I get that? You need to contact every contractor who canceled on you and ask them to provide written statements about any contact they had with Deborah Hartwell or anyone else from the HOA. Get them to be as specific as possible about what was said, when it was said, and who said it. We also need to document every financial loss you've incurred because of these cancellations. What about the fraud scheme with her son? My neighbor told me she's been doing this to multiple families. Patricia's eyes widened. If that's true, this is much bigger than just your case. That would be grounds for a criminal investigation. But again, we need evidence. Do you think your neighbor would be willing to testify about what he knows? I can ask him. Do that. In the meantime, I'm going to file a formal complaint against Deborah Hartwell and the Silverbrook Estates HOA for tortious interference. We'll request an injunction to prevent her from contacting any more of your contractors, and we'll seek damages for all the losses you've suffered so far. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked tirelessly to build my case. I contacted every contractor who had canceled on me and asked for written statements. To my surprise, most of them were willing to help once they understood what was happening. Tom Martinez provided a detailed account of his phone conversation with Deborah, including the date, time, and specific threats she had made. David Chen, the landscaper, admitted that he had received a similar call. The electrician and plumber both confirmed that they had been contacted by someone from the HOA warning them not to work on my property. I documented every penny I had lost. The deposits, the cancellation fees, the cost of living in a half-demolished kitchen, the water damage from the roof leak that was getting worse every day. It added up to just over $50,000, and the number kept growing. Richard, my neighbor, agreed to provide a statement about what he knew regarding Deborah's scheme with her son. He even helped me contact two of the families who had been forced out of the neighborhood. One of them, a couple named Jennifer and Mark Thompson, agreed to talk to me. "We lived in Silverbrook for 2 years," Jennifer told me over the phone. "Deborah Hartwell made our lives hell from day one. Every time we tried to do anything to our house, she blocked it. She fined us for violations we never committed. Our grass was too long. Our mailbox was the wrong color. Our car was parked on the street for 5 minutes too long. It was constant harassment. Did you ever notice anything suspicious about what happened after you sold your house? Oh yeah. We sold it for $30,000 under market value because we were so desperate to leave. Then, 2 months later, we saw it listed for sale again at $50,000 more than we sold it for. The listing agent was Deborah's son, Brandon Hartwell. We always suspected something shady was going on, but by that point, we just wanted to move on." This was exactly the kind of information Patricia needed. I passed everything along to her, and she immediately expanded our lawsuit to include allegations of conspiracy and fraud. She also contacted the North Carolina Real Estate Commission and the local district attorney's office with the information about Deborah's scheme. "This is bigger than I initially thought," Patricia told me during one of our meetings. "If we can prove that Deborah has been systematically forcing homeowners out to benefit her son's real estate business, we're talking about multiple felonies. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, potentially racketeering. How long is this going to take?" "These things usually take months, sometimes years, but I'm going to push for an expedited hearing on the injunction. You need to be able to hire contractors and fix your house. Living in those conditions isn't acceptable." The injunction hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after we filed the initial complaint. In the meantime, Deborah ramped up her attacks on me. I started receiving violation notices almost daily. My grass was too long, even though I had just mowed it. My garbage cans were visible from the street, even though they were in the same place everyone else kept theirs. My car was parked improperly in my own driveway. Every notice came with a fine, usually between $100 and $300. I documented every single one, took photos with timestamps, and sent everything to Patricia. It was exactly the kind of retaliatory behavior that would strengthen our case, but it was also exhausting and stressful. Then Deborah made a critical mistake. She sent me a certified letter stating that due to my continued violations of community standards and refusal to cooperate with HOA directives, I was being fined $5,000 and faced potential foreclosure proceedings if I didn't pay within 30 days. When Patricia saw the letter, she actually smiled. "This is perfect. She's overplayed her hand. There's no legitimate basis for this fine, and threatening foreclosure is going to make her look terrible in front of a judge. We're going to use this." The injunction hearing was held in Mecklenburg County Court on a Thursday morning in mid-May. I wore my best suit and tried to calm my nerves as I sat next to Patricia at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Deborah Hartwell sat with her attorney, a slick-looking guy named Raymond Price, who apparently specialized in defending HOAs. Judge Martha Reynolds presided over the hearing. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for being fair but tough. Patricia had told me that was good news for us. Patricia presented our case methodically and clearly. She introduced the written statements from 4 different contractors, all testifying that Deborah Hartwell had contacted them and threatened to blacklist them if they worked on my property. She showed the documentation of my $50,000 in losses. She presented the timeline of retaliatory violations and fines, culminating in the foreclosure threat. "Your Honor," Patricia said, "this is a clear case of tortious interference and abuse of power. Mrs. Hartwell has systematically prevented my client from maintaining his property, costing him tens of thousands of dollars, and has now threatened to take his home away from him. We're asking for an immediate injunction preventing Mrs. Hartwell and the Silverbrook Estates, HOA, from contacting my client's contractors or issuing any further violations or fines until this case is resolved." Raymond Price, Deborah's attorney, argued that the HOA had a right to enforce its rules and that there was no proof Deborah had done anything wrong. "These are simply business decisions made by independent contractors," he said. "The HOA cannot be held responsible for third parties choosing not to do business with Mr. Quill. As for the violations, they are legitimate enforcement of community standards that all homeowners agreed to when they purchased property in Silverbrook Estates." Judge Reynolds looked unimpressed. "Mr. Price, I have sworn statements from 4 contractors saying that your client specifically contacted them and threatened their business if they worked for the plaintiff. How do you explain that hearsay, Your Honor? These are uncorroborated claims made by people with no direct knowledge of my client's intentions. They're not hearsay when they're written statements from people with direct knowledge of conversations they personally had," the judge said sharply. "And I've reviewed the violation notices." "Mr. Quill, is it true that you received a violation for your grass being too long on a day when you have photographic evidence showing you had just mowed it?" I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. I mowed my lawn that morning, took photos when I finished, and received the violation notice that afternoon." "And you received violations for your garbage cans being visible, even though they were in the same location as your neighbor's garbage cans?" "Yes, Your Honor. I took photos of the entire street showing that everyone keeps their cans in the same spot." Judge Reynolds turned to Deborah. "Mrs. Hartwell, can you explain why Mr. Quill is being cited for violations that don't appear to apply to other residents?" Deborah stood up, and for the first time, I saw her composure crack slightly. "Your Honor, Mr. Quill has been a problematic homeowner from the beginning. He has shown a pattern of disregard for our community standards." "What specific standards has he disregarded?" "Well, he hasn't been cooperative with the board. He's filed complaints. He's been argumentative." "So you've been issuing violations because you don't like his attitude, not because he's actually violated any rules?" "No, Your Honor, that's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying, Mrs. Hartwell?" Deborah fumbled for words, and her attorney quickly stood up. "Your Honor, my client is not on trial here. These are internal HOA matters." "Mr. Price, your client is absolutely on trial here. This is a civil suit alleging that she has abused her authority and interfered with Mr. Quill's legal right to maintain his property. Based on the evidence I've seen, I'm inclined to agree with the plaintiff." Judge Reynolds granted our injunction. Deborah Hartwell and the Silverbrook Estates HOA were immediately prohibited from contacting any of my contractors, issuing any new violations or fines against me, or taking any action toward foreclosure. The judge also ordered the HOA to refund all the fines they had collected from me and set a trial date for the full lawsuit in 3 months. "Mrs. Hartwell," Judge Reynolds said, "I'm warning you now. If I find out you violated this injunction in any way, you will be held in contempt of court. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Deborah said quietly. Walking out of that courtroom felt incredible. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe, but Patricia warned me not to celebrate too much. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The trial is going to be tougher, and Deborah's not going to go down without a fight. Plus, we still need to build the criminal case about her fraud scheme." She was right. Over the next few weeks, things got complicated. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission opened an investigation into Brandon Hartwell's business practices. The district attorney's office started looking into the fraud allegations, and 2 more families who had been forced out of Silverbrook Estates came forward with their stories. With the injunction in place, I was finally able to get contractors to work on my house. Tom Martinez came back and finished my kitchen renovation. David Chen completed my landscaping. I got my roof fixed, my electrical panel upgraded, and my plumbing replaced. My house was finally starting to look and function the way I had envisioned when I bought it, but the stress of the ongoing legal battle was taking its toll. I was spending thousands of dollars on legal fees, even though Patricia was confident we would win. I was losing sleep, constantly worried that Deborah would find some new way to come after me. And the whole situation had made me hyper-aware of every little thing happening in the neighborhood. Then, about 2 months after the injunction hearing, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a woman named Elizabeth Jennings, who introduced herself as a resident of Silverbrook Estates. "Mr. Quill, I heard about your lawsuit against Deborah Hartwell. I live 4 houses down from you, and I wanted you to know that there are a lot of us who support what you're doing. Deborah has been a tyrant for years, and we're all tired of it. Thank you. That means a lot. I also wanted to tell you something. There's a special HOA board election being organized. Several residents are petitioning to have Deborah removed from her position as president. We're collecting signatures, and we need 75% of homeowners to sign in order to trigger the vote. Would you be willing to sign?" "Absolutely. When do you need it?" "As soon as possible. The petition has to be submitted by next Friday." I signed the petition that same day, and so did Richard and several other neighbors. The movement gained momentum quickly. It turned out that a lot of people in Silverbrook Estates had been intimidated by Deborah for years, but seeing someone stand up to her had given them courage. The petition reached the required threshold, and a special election was scheduled for late July. Deborah tried to fight it, claiming the petition was invalid on various technicalities, but the HOA bylaws were clear. The election was happening. In the meantime, the investigation into Deborah and her son was progressing. The district attorney's office had found evidence of at least 6 properties where the same pattern had played out. A family would be harassed by the HOA until they sold their house below market value. Then Brandon Hartwell would list the property, his business partner would buy it, they would flip it, and the 3 of them would split the profits. The most damning evidence came from email records that the DA's office had subpoenaed. There were emails between Deborah and her son explicitly discussing which homeowners to target and how to maximize their profits. In one email, Deborah had actually written, "The family on Oakwood Drive is getting close to breaking. Keep the pressure on, and we should be able to get their house for at least $40,000 under market." When Patricia showed me these emails, I felt sick. These weren't just business dealings gone wrong. This was a calculated, deliberate scheme to defraud and intimidate people out of their homes. "The DA is preparing criminal charges," Patricia told me. "Wire fraud, conspiracy, and potentially racketeering under the RICO Act. This is serious prison time if they're convicted. What about our civil case? With this evidence, I think we're going to win easily. The question is how much we're going to win. I'm thinking we should ask for treble damages. which means 3 times your actual losses, plus punitive damages, plus legal fees. We could be looking at a settlement or judgment well over $300,000. The number made my head spin. I hadn't gotten into this for money. I just wanted to live in my house in peace. But if Deborah was going to have to pay that much, maybe it would serve as a warning to other HOA tyrants who thought they could abuse their power. The special election happened on a hot Tuesday evening in late July. Nearly every homeowner in Silverbrook Estates showed up to vote. The results were overwhelming. Deborah Hartwell was removed from her position as HOA president by a vote of 89 to 11. 3 other board members who had supported her were also voted out. A new board was elected, with Elizabeth Jennings as the new president. Her first act was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA and to announce that the association would not be contesting our lawsuit. The previous board acted inappropriately and illegally, Elizabeth said at the community meeting after the election. We are going to cooperate fully with Mr. Quill and his attorney to resolve this matter fairly and to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again in our community. 2 weeks later, Patricia called me with news. The HOA has offered a settlement. They're willing to pay $320,000 to cover your losses, damages, and legal fees. They're also agreeing to a permanent injunction preventing them from retaliating against you in any way. What do you think? I thought about it for about 5 seconds. I'll take it. Good choice. I'll draw up the paperwork. The settlement was finalized in early September. The HOA's insurance company cut me a check for $320,000. After Patricia's fees and reimbursing myself for all the losses I had incurred, I still walked away with over $200,000. I used some of it to add a pool to my backyard, something I had always wanted but couldn't afford before. But the story wasn't over yet. In mid-September, Deborah Hartwell, her son Brandon, and Brandon's business partner Marcus Klein were arrested and charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and racketeering. The DA had built an airtight case, and all 3 of them were looking at serious prison time. I attended the arraignment, mostly out of curiosity. Seeing Deborah in handcuffs, being led into a courtroom as a defendant instead of sitting there with her smug smile, was surreal. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested in going easy on them. The trial was scheduled for January of the following year. Patricia kept me updated on the progress, and it became clear pretty quickly that Deborah and her co-conspirators were going to be convicted. The evidence was overwhelming, and several of the families they had defrauded agreed to testify. Rather than go through a lengthy trial, all 3 defendants eventually accepted plea deals. Deborah pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Brandon and Marcus each received 3-year sentences. All 3 were also ordered to pay restitution to the families they had defrauded, totaling over $2 million. By the time everything was settled, it was February, almost a full year after this nightmare had started. I was sitting in my completed kitchen, the one Tom Martinez had finally finished, drinking coffee and looking out at my newly landscaped backyard. The pool was scheduled to be finished in March, just in time for summer. Richard came over that morning to borrow some tools, and we ended up talking about everything that had happened. You know, when you first told me you were going to fight Deborah, I didn't think you had a chance, he admitted. I figured you'd end up like everyone else, beaten down and forced to leave. I'm glad I was wrong. I'm glad I was too stubborn to quit, I said, although there were definitely moments when I questioned whether it was worth it. It was worth it. You didn't just save yourself. You saved this whole community. Elizabeth is doing a great job as HOA president. The board is actually functioning the way it's supposed to. People aren't afraid anymore. That's because of you." I appreciated his words, but I also knew that I hadn't done it alone. Patricia had been an incredible attorney. The contractors who had been brave enough to provide statements had been crucial. The neighbors who had signed the petition and voted Deborah out had made a difference. It had taken a whole community standing up to make things right. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Jennifer Thompson, the woman who had been forced out of Silverbrook Estates years earlier. She and her husband had received a restitution payment of $47,000 as part of Deborah's sentence, covering the amount they had lost when they sold their house below market value. "Thank you for having the courage to fight," she wrote. "We had given up on ever seeing justice for what Deborah did to us. Your lawsuit exposed everything and made this possible. You gave us closure and made us financially whole again. We're forever grateful." Reading that letter made every stressful moment, every sleepless night, every dollar spent on legal fees feel worth it. I hadn't just been fighting for myself. I had been fighting for everyone Deborah had victimized, and we had won. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up to bullies and abusers of power. People like Deborah Hartwell count on their victims being too intimidated, too exhausted, or too financially strapped to fight back. They rely on people just giving up and walking away. But when you stand your ground, document everything, get good legal help, and refuse to be pushed around, you can win. It's not easy and it's not cheap, but it's possible. My life in Silverbrook Estates has been peaceful since then. The new HOA board is reasonable and fair. They enforce the rules when necessary, but they don't use their authority as a weapon. They work with homeowners instead of against them. It's what an HOA should be. I still see some of the people who were involved in the whole mess. Tom Martinez and I became friends, and he's done several other projects on my house since the kitchen remodel. David Chen comes by every spring to help with my landscaping. Elizabeth Jennings and I serve together on the HOA Architectural Review Committee now, making sure that the approval process is fair and transparent. And every time I pull into my driveway and see my beautiful house, with its renovated kitchen and landscaped yard and soon-to-be-finished pool, I'm reminded that I almost lost all of this. I almost let Deborah Hartwell drive me out of my home, but I didn't. I fought back and I won. The whole ordeal cost me about 6 months of stress, a lot of money that I eventually recovered, and countless hours of my time. But it also taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was. It taught me that justice is possible when you're willing to fight for it. And it taught me that communities are stronger when people stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Deborah Hartwell is currently serving her sentence at a federal correctional facility in West Virginia. She'll be there for at least another 3 years. Her son Brandon lost his real estate license and is serving his sentence at a different facility. Marcus Klein's business collapsed after the conviction, and he filed for bankruptcy. I don't take any pleasure in their suffering. I'm not a vindictive person. But I do believe they deserve to be held accountable for what they did. They hurt a lot of people, destroyed families' financial security, and abused positions of trust. The consequences they're facing are appropriate. As for me, I'm just living my life. I go to work every day as an accountant at a firm in downtown Charlotte. I come home to my house in Silverbrook Estates. I swim in my pool, work in my garden, and hang out with my neighbors. It's a normal, peaceful suburban life, exactly what I wanted when I bought this house. But I'll never forget the lesson I learned during those difficult months. HOAs can be forces for good, maintaining community standards and protecting property values. But they can also be tools for abuse when the wrong people get power. It's important to pay attention to who's running your HOA, to speak up when something isn't right, and to stand up for yourself and your neighbors when someone tries to abuse their authority. I've been asked several times if I regret buying a house in an HOA community, knowing what I know now. The answer is no. I love my house, I love my neighborhood, and I love the life I've built here. The problem was never the HOA itself. The problem was Deborah Hartwell and her criminal scheme. Once she was removed and the board was reformed, everything worked the way it was supposed to. If anything, I'm grateful for the experience in a weird way. It showed me that I have more strength than I realized. It connected me with my community in ways that never would have happened otherwise. It taught me about the legal system and my rights as a homeowner. And it gave me a story that I'll be telling for the rest of my life. I still keep all the documentation from the lawsuit in a file in my office. Sometimes I look through it, just to remind myself that it really happened. The violation notices for grass that wasn't too long. The contractor statements describing Deborah's threats. The emails where she and her son plotted to defraud families. The settlement agreement. The news articles about the criminal trial. It's all real and it all happened. And I survived it. More than survived it. I beat it, with help from good people who were willing to stand with me. That's something I'm proud of, and it's something that can never be taken away from me. The pool was finally completed in late March, and I had a big party to celebrate. I invited all the neighbors, the contractors who had worked on my house, Patricia Foster, Richard, Elizabeth Jennings, and even Jennifer and Mark Thompson drove in from their new home in Raleigh to attend. It was a beautiful spring day, warm but not too hot, perfect for a pool party. As I stood there watching everyone enjoying themselves, swimming and eating and laughing, I realized that this was what I had been fighting for all along. Not just my house or my money or my pride. I had been fighting for the right to build a life in a place where I wanted to be, surrounded by good people who treated each other with respect and fairness. Deborah Hartwell had tried to take that away from me. She had tried to intimidate me, financially ruin me, and force me out of my home. But she had failed, and in the process of fighting back, I had helped create something better than what existed before. A community where people looked out for each other, where the HOA served the residents instead of tyrannizing them, and where bullies didn't win. That night, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up, Richard came back over to help. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, picking up cups and plates and wiping down tables. "You know what the best part of all this is?" he said eventually. "What's that?" Deborah thought she was untouchable. She had gotten away with her scheme for years and she thought she always would. But all it took was one person refusing to back down and her whole empire collapsed. "I was just trying to fix my kitchen," I said, but I was smiling. That's exactly my point. You weren't trying to be a hero or start a crusade. You just wanted to live your life and maintain your property. But when someone tried to stop you, you fought back. That's what real courage looks like. Not looking for a fight, but not running away from one either. His words meant a lot to me. I had spent so many nights during the lawsuit wondering if I was doing the right thing, if the stress and expense were worth it, if I should just sell the house and move somewhere else. But I hadn't quit, and everything had worked out better than I could have imagined. As I locked up my house that night and got ready for bed, I took a moment to stand in my kitchen, the same kitchen that had started this whole mess when Tom Martinez drove away without doing the work. It was beautiful now, with custom cabinets, granite countertops, and stainless steel appliances. It was exactly what I had envisioned, what I had paid for, and what I deserved to have. I thought about how different things could have been if I had given up, if I had just accepted Deborah's harassment and either lived in a half-demolished house or sold at a loss and moved away. I would have lost my home, my money, and my self-respect. Deborah would have continued her scheme, victimizing more families. Nothing would have changed, but I didn't give up. I gathered evidence, hired a good lawyer, stood my ground in court, and saw it through to the end. And because of that, Deborah was in prison. Her victims had received restitution. The HOA had been reformed, and my community was better and stronger. The next morning, I woke up to my alarm and got ready for work, just like I did every day. I made breakfast in my renovated kitchen, grabbed my briefcase, and headed out to my car. As I backed out of my driveway, I noticed that my neighbor across the street was having some work done. There was a contractor's truck parked in front of his house, and workers were unloading equipment. I smiled. That contractor wasn't afraid to work in Silverbrook Estates anymore. Deborah Hartwell was gone, and the reign of terror was over. People could hire contractors, improve their homes, and live their lives without fear of retaliation. That was something worth fighting for, and I was glad I had done it. As I drove to work that morning, heading down the tree-lined streets of my neighborhood toward the highway that would take me into Charlotte, I felt a sense of peace and satisfaction that had been missing for a long time. My life wasn't perfect. I still had problems and challenges like everyone else. But I had my home, I had my community, and I had the knowledge that when I was pushed, I pushed back. And in the end, that made all the difference.